Before starting this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because in some villages, it's not just humans who live at night. My name is Arda. Years have passed since the events I'm about to tell you. Right now, I have a happy family, 2 children, and a quiet life. But at night, I sometimes still hear the exact same sound. The whispers coming from beneath the ground, and whenever there is a rainy night, her face comes to my mind. Her faded skin, her blank eyes, and that single sentence she said without looking at me, "They won't let you leave." Before I went to the military, I was just an ordinary village youth. There was a girl I loved. We had known each other since childhood. But sometimes a person doesn't know that the greatest evil is not waiting for them in war, but at the home they return to. The village I grew up in was a small place. Everyone knew each other. Since our childhood was spent on the same streets, there wasn't a time I didn't remember Zainab. We studied in the same class from primary school to high school. Sometimes, a person doesn't realize they've fallen in love with someone for years because that person is already a part of their life. Zainab was like that. She was quiet. She didn't talk much, but whenever she looked at me, I felt something different in her eyes. We were never boyfriend and girlfriend because in a village setting, such things would spread instantly. But everyone already knew we loved each other. Only the 2 of us wouldn't say it. Then the time for military service came. As the day of my departure approached, I realized the growing fear inside me wasn't the fear of war. I was afraid of losing her. 10 days before I left, we met in the late afternoon on the old river road outside the village. The sky was turning orange. My hands were shaking because for the first time I was truly going to open up to her. For a long time I couldn't speak. Then finally I said it. "I love you," I said. Zainab remained silent for a few seconds. Then her eyes filled with tears and she smiled faintly. "I know," she said. At that moment it felt as if the whole world had stopped. When she approached me and said, "I will wait for you," it was the happiest moment of my life. Because I was certain that when I returned I would marry her. The first months everything was beautiful. She was constantly sending me letters. I read every letter dozens of times. She talked about the village, the rain, and how much she missed me. But after a few months, the letters began to decrease. Then they stopped completely. At first, I thought something important had happened. Maybe her family had found out. Maybe she had fallen ill. But the bad feeling growing inside me wouldn't go away. I tried to reach her, but phone reception in the village was barely working. As the days passed, I became unable to sleep at night because I had started seeing dreams. Zainab was constantly standing in a dark place, crying without looking at me. There were shadows behind her, and every time she said the same thing: "You're late." With only a few weeks left until the end of my military service, I couldn't take it anymore. I kept trying to ask for leave, but it didn't work out. Finally, when discharge day came, I returned to the village without losing any time. Throughout the journey, only one thing was on my mind: to see her. When I arrived home, my mother and father were happy to see me, but there was a strange tension on their faces. Without even putting my bag down, I asked about Zainab. At that moment, the atmosphere in the house changed. My mother averted her eyes. My father put out his cigarette. "Don't go now," my father said. I asked immediately. "Rest a bit first," my mother said, but their voices weren't normal. They were hiding something. The fear inside me began to grow. "What happened to her?" I shouted. No one answered. At that moment, I realized I couldn't wait. I slammed the door and left. I went straight to Zainab's house. But when I arrived at the house, the first strangeness began because all the curtains were closed. There was no one in the yard. I knocked on the door. A few seconds later, her mother came out. When the woman saw me, her face turned stark white. "Where is Zainab?" I asked immediately. The woman remained silent for a few seconds. Then she forced a smile. "She's sick," she said. "Don't go near her." "What does she have?" "Contagious," she said quickly. "The doctor isn't letting anyone near." I knew she was lying because her eyes were terrified. Strange sounds were also coming from inside, as if someone was walking in the room. Heavy and slow, she turned me away. But the next day I went back. Day after I went again. Every time they gave another excuse. Sometimes they said she was sleeping, sometimes that she was having a crisis. The people in the village avoided talking too. They would fall silent when they saw me. And at night, a strange silence began to fall over the village. Even the dogs wouldn't bark. On the 4th day, I went in front of the house again. This time it was raining. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard her voice from the back. It was a very weak voice. "Arda." I froze. The voice was coming from behind the yard. I ran over there. There was someone behind the high stone wall. Stretching up, I saw her, and what I saw changed my life. At first glance, I couldn't believe the person standing behind the wall was truly Zainab, because the girl who had smiled while writing me letters a few months ago was gone. Her face was faded. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was messy. But what terrified me the most were her eyes, because she wasn't looking at me. She was staring into the void as if I weren't right in front of her. While the rain trickled down her hair, she stood motionless for a few seconds. Then her lips parted slightly. "Go," she said in a very low voice. My chest tightened. "Zainab, it's me," I said immediately. "What happened to you?" But she didn't answer. I climbed over the wall and jumped down beside her. At that moment, I realized how thin she had become. Her arms were like bones. As I approached her, I caught a heavy scent of incense. It was as if her room had been filled with incense for days. The moment I tried to hold her hand, she pulled back suddenly. That movement wasn't normal. It wasn't like a human reflex. It was incredibly fast. Then she looked at me for the first time, and I saw that her pupils were larger than normal, as if they had grown in the dark. Her lips trembled. "They found me," she said. Just as I was about to ask what she meant, the door of the house flew open. Her father came outside. Seeing the fear on his face, the bad feeling inside me grew even stronger. "Arda, get out of here," he shouted. Right after, my mother and father came running as well. My father grabbed me by the arm. "That's enough," he said sharply. For the first time, I heard fear in my father's voice. Zainab had bowed her head at that moment. Then she began whispering something to herself. I was able to hear it when I got closer. She was repeating the same sentence. "Don't open the door, it comes at night." At that moment, her mother started to cry. They forced me out of the yard. While returning home, I was shaking with anger because everyone was lying to me. As soon as I entered the house, I started shouting. "Tell me what is going on," I said. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, my mother sat down, crying. My father spoke without even looking at my face. "They have haunted that girl," he said. At first, I didn't understand what he meant. "Who?" I asked. My father lit his cigarette. His hand was shaking. "The jinn," he said. At that moment, I laughed out of anger because I didn't believe in such things. But my mother kept crying. My father began to explain. While I was in the military, Zainab had started to change at night. First, she had nightmares. Then she started talking to herself at night. Sometimes she would stare at a blank wall for hours. Finally, one night, her family found her going toward the cemetery behind the house. She was digging the dirt with bare feet. After that night, everyone in the village started to be afraid, because Zainab sometimes spoke with different voices, with a man's voice, like an old person, even with a child's voice. The village religious leader came. Prayers were recited, but nothing changed. Finally, they called a spiritual healer from the city. The man stayed in the house for 3 days. On the last day when he came out, his face was stark white. "This girl is not alone," he said, and left. After that night, no one approached the house. As my father was telling this, my logic began to shatter because what they described was absolute madness, but I had seen Zainab's eyes. I couldn't forget that blank stare. I couldn't sleep that night. Toward midnight, a faint tapping sound came from outside the window. Tap, tap. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound came again. The moment I parted the curtain, it felt like my heart would stop because someone was standing in the yard. A tall, black silhouette. It wasn't moving. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it looking at me. A few seconds later, the silhouette slowly pulled back and disappeared into the darkness. At that moment, for the first time, I was truly terrified. Because I had a feeling. They had noticed me now, too. After that night, the village no longer looked like the place from my childhood, because when a person begins to fear, even the same streets change. During the day, everyone tried to act normal, but when evening came, the doors of the houses closed early. No light leaked from the windows. It was as if the whole village went into hiding before night fell. As for me, it was as if I was being stubborn. I wasn't going to leave Zainab in that state. The next morning, I went to their house again. This time, her father opened the door. His eyes were sunken. It was as if he hadn't slept for weeks. "I want to see her," I said. The man fell silent for a few seconds. Then he shook his head quietly. "No," he said. "She sometimes doesn't recognize you anymore." I started to get angry. "I won't leave her," I shouted. The man looked into my eyes, and for the first time I saw something other than fear on his face. Despair. "We didn't leave her either," he said, "but some things get out of human hands." Just then, a loud slamming sound came from inside the house. A woman's scream was heard. Right after, Zeynep's voice rose, but this was not her normal voice. It was a muffled, deep, and angry voice. "Bring a chayam to me," she shouted. My blood ran cold, because that voice didn't belong to a girl. All of a sudden, the sound of prayers rose in the house. Her mother was crying. Her father quickly tried to close the door, but I blocked him. The moment I looked inside, I saw Zeynep at the end of the hallway. She was wearing a white dress. Her hair was covering her face, but the way she stood wasn't normal. She had tilted her head slightly to the side, and she was smiling without looking at me. Then all of a sudden, she raised her head. Her eyes looked completely black. "You're late," she said. The moment I heard that voice, it felt as if the entire house turned ice cold. Her father pushed me outside and closed the door. Screams continued to come from inside. That day, while sitting alone at the old coffee house outside the village, I was thinking about what to do. At that moment, an old man came up to me. He was someone who rarely spoke in the village. He sat across from me silently. "Leave the girl alone," he said. "Otherwise, they will find you too." I stood up in anger. "Who are they?" I asked. The old man took a puff from his cigarette. "Some jinn do not come alone," he said. "They also want the people they love." That sentence didn't leave my head all day. That night I woke up again to the same tapping sound. But this time the sound wasn't just coming from the window. It was also heard from inside the house. Tap, 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 as if someone was walking on the floor with a cane. My heart began to beat wildly. I looked at my father's room. The door was closed. My mother and father were sleeping. But the sound continued to come from the hallway. I took the old shotgun in my hand. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I realized the inside of the house was darker than normal. The lights were on, but the light seemed insufficient. Tap, tap, the sound was coming from the kitchen. I advanced slowly, and when I came to the kitchen door, I froze because there were muddy footprints on the floor. It didn't look like a human foot. It was long. It had too many toes. Right at that moment, a whisper came from behind me. "Arda." It felt as if something ice cold passed down my neck. I turned around, but there was no one. Then the voice came again, this time right next to my ear. "Come to us." I almost dropped the gun from my hand. At that moment, the window in the kitchen cracked on its own. Crack. Right after, whispers rose from inside the entire house at the same time. A woman's voice, a man's voice, a child's voice, they were all speaking at once. "Night is coming. Open the door, give him to us." My mother came out of her room screaming. My father began to recite prayers, and right at that moment I saw a silhouette in the darkness of the kitchen. It was standing close to the ceiling. It wasn't like a human because it was very tall, and it was looking at us without moving. My mother began to cry. My father grabbed me by the arm. "They found you," he said with a trembling voice. "They won't let you go now either." The moment my father said, "They won't let you go now either," all the lights inside the house went out at the same time, and my mother's scream echoed through the darkness. Because when human eyes are trying to adjust to the dark, the brain's greatest enemy becomes imagination. But what I saw that night was no imagination. The silhouette standing within the darkness of the kitchen began to move. It was very close to the ceiling. It was too high up for a normal human to stand. And as it moved, cracking sounds came from its joints. My father pushed me behind him. He began to recite prayers, but his voice was trembling. That thing, meanwhile, began to slowly descend from the ceiling. For the first time, I could discern its face. Its face wasn't fully visible because the darkness seemed to gather around it, but in the place where its eyes should have been, there were two dark voids. Then it smiled. It was not like a human mouth. It was immense. My mother collapsed to the floor and began to cry. At that moment, sounds began to come from outside the house as well. Someone was walking behind the windows. Muddy footsteps were circling the entire perimeter of the house. Tap, tap, tap. It was as if an invisible crowd was watching us. My father shouted, "Get into the room." We all ran quickly into the living room. My father closed the door and pushed the wardrobe against it. Then he pulled a small amulet out of an old chest. I had never seen him in this state before. His face was stark white. "We will not leave this room until morning," he said. "No matter what happens, do not open the door." Scratching sounds began to come from outside. At first, it was faint. Then it grew stronger. It was as if long fingernails were scraping across the door. My mother was continuously reciting prayers. As for me, I was having difficulty breathing because a heavy smell of decay had begun to spread inside. A few minutes later, Zainab's voice came from the other side of the door. "Arda," she said, crying, my chest tight. "Open the door." My mother immediately raised her head. "Don't you dare," she shouted. But that voice truly was Zainab's voice. "Please," she was saying. "I'm so scared." I started to approach the door, but my father grabbed my arm. His fingers were shaking. "It's not her," he said. The voice outside suddenly changed. It became as if several people were speaking at the exact same time. "Open, open, open." Then a violent blow struck the door. Thud. The wardrobe shifted out of place. My mother screamed. Another blow came. Thud. A crack formed on the upper section of the door, and at that moment the air inside turned ice cold. Because through the crack I saw an eye watching the inside. It was not a human eye. It was completely black. It looked at us for a few seconds, then it pulled back. Following that, all the sounds around the house suddenly fell silent. A stillness began, but that silence was more terrifying because we could feel that something was waiting. Minutes passed. Then the sound of the adhan coming from very far away outside was heard. It was the morning prayer. At that moment, the pressure inside the house eased. My father slowly sat down on the floor. He was drenched in sweat. "They are gone for now," he said, but there was no hope in his eyes. The next day, it felt as if everyone in the village was watching us. People wouldn't speak, but they would avert their eyes. I now had to accept that this was not something normal because what I had seen last night was not human. That day, I spoke with the old religious leader behind the village mosque. When the man saw me, he remained silent for a long time. Then he said only one sentence. "They are not coming for the girl," he said. "They are coming for you." My blood ran cold. "Why?" I asked. The old man took a deep breath. "Because she loves you," he said, "and some jinn attach themselves to where love exists." At that moment, the nightmares I had seen during my military service came to my mind. Zainab constantly telling me, "You're late." Perhaps it had all started back then. The religious leader gave me a small piece of paper. Prayers were written on it. "Do not be alone at night," he said, "and no matter what you hear, do not look back." That night I called my old military friend Murat. He had told me once that his father dealt with spiritual sciences, but I hadn't taken it seriously at the time. When he answered the phone, my voice was shaking. I told him everything. He remained silent for a long time. Then he said only this: "My father is coming tomorrow." Waiting for that night was the longest thing in my life. Because after darkness fell, that same silence settled over the village again. And toward midnight, I began to hear the sound of something walking on the roof of the house. It was past midnight when the footsteps on the roof of the house began, and every sound made the silence inside the house a bit heavier. Tap, tap, tap. But this was not a normal walking sound because sometimes it proceeded on two legs like a human, and sometimes it accelerated like a four-legged animal. My mother began to cry. My father was squeezing the prayer beads in his hand so tightly that his fingers had turned stark white. As for me, I was staring at the ceiling because I could feel that thing wandering right above us. Then all of a sudden the sound stopped. In those few seconds of silence, we all held our breath. Then a faint scratching sound came from the ceiling, as if long fingernails were scraping the wood. Click, 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 and right at that moment, the sound of a car was heard from outside. A vehicle had entered the village road. When the headlight beam struck through the windows, I felt hope for the first time. My father parted the curtain slightly. "They have arrived," he said in a whisper. The people arriving were Murat and his father. The moment we stepped outside, the air was much colder than normal. There was a heavy fog over the village. Murat's father, Uncle Yusuf, was a man in his 50s with a stern face. When he saw me, he didn't say anything. He just looked into my eyes. Then he nodded silently. "They have made contact," he said. That sentence hit my stomach like a punch. Together, we began to walk toward Zainab's house. The village streets were completely empty. There wasn't even the sound of a single dog. It was as if the whole village was holding its breath and watching us. As we neared the house, we heard shouting from inside. A woman's voice, a man's voice, and other things, muffled voices that did not sound like human voices were mixing together. Uncle Yusuf stopped in front of the door. He took a small leather pouch from his pocket. Taking something like black powder from inside, he sprinkled it in front of the door. Then he began to recite a prayer. At that moment, a terrifying scream rose from inside the house. The windows vibrated. Zainab's mother opened the door, crying. "Quickly," she shouted. "The sight I saw when we entered still hasn't left my mind." Zainab was chained to the corner of the room. She had made her own face bleed by rubbing her hands against it. Her hair was completely disheveled. But what terrified me the most were the marks on the ceiling. There were long black handprints on the ceiling of the room. They were not like human hands. The fingers were excessively long. The moment Uncle Yusuf entered the room, his expression changed. "There is not just one," he said quietly. "There are several inside." At that moment, Zainab slowly raised her head and she looked at me. For the first time, she was truly looking at me. Tears trickled from her eyes. "Arda," she said in her normal voice. Just as I was about to approach her, her face changed all of a sudden. Her lips stretched tight. Her neck slowly turned to the side. Then another voice came out of her mouth, a thick, muffled man's voice. "We found you," my mother screamed. At that moment, all the light bulbs in the room shattered. Shards of glass scattered onto the floor, and the inside of the house was plunged completely into darkness. Only the prayers recited by Uncle Yusuf could be heard. Then something moved within the darkness. On the ceiling, once my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A pitch-black, long silhouette was crawling on the ceiling. As it moved, it was as if its bones were turning inside out. Muret pulled back in fear. As for me, I was frozen stiff, because that thing had no face. There was only darkness. All of a sudden, it leaped down from the ceiling. When it landed in the middle of the room, the floor shook. Uncle Yusuf raised his prayer, shouting. The moment he held the amulet in his hand toward the creature, all the whispers inside the house began to scream at the same time. I covered my ears because it felt as if the sound was entering inside my brain. Zainab was thrashing within the chains. She was crying but laughing at the same time. Then the moment Uncle Yusuf recited a prayer in a loud voice, all the windows in the room blew out. SHHHT. And at that exact moment, that dark silhouette suddenly pulled back. It slammed against the wall. Then it dispersed like black smoke spreading toward the ceiling. The house was trembling. The whispers grew more and more distant. Then there was silence, real silence. Zainab collapsed to the floor, fainting. At that moment, everyone froze because for the first time, the pressure inside the house had vanished. Uncle Yusuf sat down on the floor, exhausted. His face was covered in sweat. "They are gone," he said, out of breath. But not completely. Days later, Zainab slowly began to return to normal. It took months, but eventually she began to smile again. And a year later, I married her. Now we have 2 children, we have a happy life. But some nights when I still wake up, I hear sounds walking on the roof of the house. Tap, tap, tap. Last month, my little son came to my side at midnight and looked at me with sleepy eyes. Then he said this quietly. "Dad," he said, "why is the man at the window looking at us?" At that moment, my blood ran cold. Because when I parted the curtain, under the rain, standing across the street, I saw the long, dark silhouette. And that thing still hadn't gone away. The moment I closed the curtain, my hand was shaking because that thing standing under the rain was not human. It wasn't moving. It was just watching the house. A tall, dark silhouette. The exact same shape I had seen on the wall of Zainab's house years ago. That night, I did not leave the front of the window until morning. Every few minutes, I parted the curtain and looked. And that thing was always there. Sometimes it got a bit closer. Sometimes it disappeared into the fog, but it wouldn't go away completely. When the morning adhan began to be recited, it suddenly vanished. It was as if it had withdrawn along with the darkness. I told myself it was due to fear. I thought the trauma had returned. But the next morning, when I went outside, I saw muddy footprints on the soil. Long tracks that did not resemble human feet. And the tracks went directly up to the window of my children's room. At that moment, the fear I had suppressed for years rushed back inside me. I called Uncle Yusuf, but when Muret answered the phone, his voice sounded bad. "My father died last month," he said. My inside turned to ice. "Before he died, he was constantly talking about your village," he continued. He was saying that some things would return. After that night, strange things began to happen in the house. My little son would sometimes stare at a blank wall and talk to himself. My wife said she heard footsteps inside the house at night, and on every rainy night, the electricity would cut out for a short period of time. But the most terrifying thing happened last week. When I went down to the kitchen at midnight to drink water, I heard faint whispers coming from the living room. At first, I thought the television had been left on, but when I entered the living room, the television was off. The sound was coming from outside the window. I slowly parted the curtain and I saw it again. This time it was not alone. The number of dark silhouettes standing at the edge of the yard was greater. They were looking at the house silently. They weren't moving at all, they were just watching. Then one of them slowly raised its head, and I heard a voice right next to my ear, like a whisper. "We haven't forgotten you." I closed the curtain immediately, but I still hear that voice sometimes. Because some jinn are not banished. They only withdraw for a time, and some nights they still find our door.